Hi, folks. Why don't we kick this off? Um, Good afternoon for most of you, and good morning to those of you still here on the beautiful West Coast. Thank you all so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us today to learn about smart tech and how smart tech is transforming nonprofits. My name is Nejeed Kassam. I'm a husband, a father, and a recovering corporate lawyer who has spent his life working in and around the nonprofit sector as a volunteer, a fundraiser, an executive director, a board member, and now as the CEO and co-founder of Fundraising Kit. For those of you who aren't familiar with Kit, as we like to call it, Kit is an AI-powered fundraising analytics platform that integrates with your CRM to give you a comprehensive set of predictions and insights on your donors to help you identify, segment, and prioritize those ready to make a bigger impact. Kit integrates into a number of leading CRMs, including Keela, Salesforce, and Razor's Edge NXT, as well as a host of wealth screening and donor communications tools. Much more importantly, I am so excited to welcome and introduce two wonderful people joining me today for this fireside chat, Beth Kanter and Allison Fine, who happen to be the co-authors of the newly released book, The Smart Nonprofit, Staying Human-Centered in an Age of Automation. Beth Kanter, for those of you who don't know, is an internationally recognized thought leader and trainer in digital transformation and well-being in the nonprofit workplace. Along with The Smart Nonprofit, she is the co-author of the award-winning book, The Happy, Healthy Nonprofit, Impact Without Burnout, and a bunch of other things too. Named one of the most influential women in technology by Fast Company and the recipient of the N10 Lifetime Achievement Award, Beth has over 3 decades of experience in designing and delivering training programs for nonprofits and foundations. I'm also very privileged to have served alongside Beth as a fellow board member on the N10 Board of Directors. Now to Allison. Allison Fine is among the nation's preeminent writers and strategists on the use of technology for social good. In addition to the Smart Nonprofit, she is the author of the award-winning book, Momentum, Igniting Social Change in the Connected Age, as well as Matterness, Fearless Leadership for a Social World, and co-author with Beth Kanter of the best-selling The Networked Nonprofit. I am sure I have missed a lot of bio items on these two amazing people, but we actually have something to talk about today. I'm also excited to let everybody know about some great giveaways that we are doing as part of this chat today. Not only will we be giving away 10 copies of Allison and Beth's book at the end of this webinar, but we're also giving one lucky attendee a 1-year free subscription to Kit, valued at over $7,500. Anyway, today we're here to explore and share insights about how your nonprofit can reinvent your work and achieve transformative impact with an ethical and responsible approach to adopting smart tech. I'll be asking Beth and Allison some questions relating to their experience with smart tech and how it's revolutionizing fundraising. Please feel free to ask any questions that come up during our chat directly in the Q&A box, probably down here somewhere for y'all. And we'll do our best to answer them throughout, or at least get to them at the end. So with all the housekeeping and the awkward introductions taken care of, let's jump right in. As I mentioned, Beth, Allison, you both have a new book out that discusses a framework for nonprofit digital transformation and embraces the human-centered nature of organizations. Allison, tell me, why'd you write the book?
Thanks so much for having us. It's really an honor and a pleasure. About 12 years ago, we released a book, The Networked Nonprofit, about social media. And
I have it somewhere.
As to a lot of people, it was very well received. And it was at exactly the point, Nejeed, when what we call the heel of the hockey stick of technology adoption was happening, right? The cost of the technology is going down really quickly. The power is going up, in what feels like an instant. Technology that was only available to scientists and NASA is available to everyday people and organizations. And exactly that same thing is happening right now with this family of technology that we call smart tech. So we wanted to make sure this technology is incredibly powerful, right? It is automating tasks within organizations in a way that's never happened in human history before, right? We've had technology make things go faster. We've not had technology making decisions instead of people in this way before. So we wanted to take this moment to help to get ahead of this curve and provide a framework for what this technology is, what it does well, what it doesn't do well, and how smart nonprofits can use it to free up time for staff to do what humans ought to be doing.
So Allison, what's a smart nonprofit?
A smart nonprofit is an organization that's human-centered, prepared to use smart tech, and knowledgeable about how to use it well.
Which is a really great segue to my next question. And I think I'm going to point this one to Beth.
Yeah.
Tell me, Beth, now that Allison's defined a smart nonprofit, I would hope every nonprofit is smart, but anyway, what is smart tech? What does it do? And why should we as folks in the sector pay any attention to it?
That's a really great question, Nejeed. So smart tech, we use that as an umbrella term to describe advanced digital technologies that are making decisions like, what to watch on TV, or automating tasks like answering questions or filling out forms. And so it includes technologies like, and I'm going to give you a lot of blah, blah, blah technical terms, in artificial intelligence, machine learning, chatbots, robots, smart automation, natural language processing. And so it's that group.
Be careful, Beth. I think every one of those words is on our website. So just,
All right. Yes, I will be very careful. So those are the words, right? To describe this technology that is really making decisions for people instead of by people. And so to unpack it a little bit, let's unpack what's in it. What's in that ingredients box, So the first thing you have is data, and you have lots and lots and lots of data, Library of Congress-sized data sets, as Allison likes to describe it. I love that phrase. In fact, when we were writing the book, we had this big debate about, well, let's quantify this. How many books are in the Library of Congress? How many kilobytes per book? And we went back and forth.
The answer was a lot.
Yeah. So we actually quantified it in the book. But anyway, a lot of, let's just say a boatload of data. And then you have these things called algorithms, which is basically a set of rules or mathematical equations, or another way to describe them are recipes. And those recipes do stuff, right? And I guess in the case of your product, they analyze lots of data that a human can't do very easily. So to see what the patterns are, or it may analyze some data and then trigger some automated tasks. So that's what the technology is. And it's really funny because the title of this book was, when we started, was Artificial Intelligence for Good, staying human-centered, something like that. And when we were talking about it with leaders, they would back up and, that's not for me. So we came up with the term smart tech to kind of as an umbrella term, because we wanted to make it clear that, this is not a technical issue. And we're going to dive into this a little bit more later in the conversation. Really, leaders need to lean into this because it has major implications on how it can transform their organizations and ultimately transform the sector.
So I'm going to push and prod a little, and either of you is welcome to jump in on this. The first question is, why do you think people are scared of the term AI? Because you just said that's not for me. And look, I'm a, almost 40 millennial, elder millennial, as I like to say, and I'm scared of AI a little bit. And but I also still write with a fountain pen, so who knows?
Right. Fountain pens.
They're the best.
Yes.
I got three, but on my desk. But the question I have to ask is why? First one is, why are people scared of AI? And the second one, which you may want to incorporate into your answer, is you said something really interesting when you said where technology that's making decisions for people.
Yeah.
And I'm going to dig in a little bit about what you mean by decision making, because
Yeah.
the way that we talk about it internally and in kind of in my intellectual circles is it's empowering people to make better decisions as opposed to making decisions on folks' behalf. And there may be a bit of both in that. So first question is like, why is there that fear? And the second one is it really for me, or is it more like with me?
Okay, so I'll take the fear and then pass it over to Allison for the with me or for me, because she's really great at answering that one. So I think, I actually saw a study, I think it was the Mozilla Foundation, where they were using an AI tool to dissect media and social media narratives about different topics. And this particular one was about artificial intelligence. It was really interesting, Nejeed. You should, grab a hold of it. I'll try to find the link at some point.
Please. Yeah.
But basically there's a set of like kind of negative, scary narratives that are out there in the public media, and then some that are more positive. So some of the negative narratives, and this comes from sort of the popularization of science fiction from the 50s, when the term was coined, robots, evil robots are going to take over the world. And I think more recently, I think the kind of AI as evil overlord narrative has something that's been propagated by the new owner of Twitter, but that's another topic. And so we're trying to scare, when you are the top level predator on Earth, right? You're the richest man on Earth. Of course you can start these narratives, but they're, AI is smarter than us, and it's going to destroy us. That's not true. There's other studies that show that we've been 10 years away from that for the last 30 years, And one of our favorite examples to illustrate that, the smart tech isn't really so smart yet, it is it can't tell a chihuahua from a blueberry muffin. Okay. And there's a study that was done where an algorithm that analyzes pixels in images was fed a whole bunch of pictures of chihuahuas and blueberry muffins and asked to tag them, and it got it wrong most of the time. And there's actually some hilarious images that you can see. So that's one of the one scary narrative. Another scary narrative is that, and if we use this tech irresponsibly, potentially it could happen, is that, people are going to be unemployed, they're going to lose their jobs, and the robots are going to take over. That's not true. There's been studies to counter that as well. What's going to really happen is an era of co-botting, where the robots, bots, this technology is going to take the grunt work and do the grunt work and allow humans to really focus on the human-centered work. And as a result, the nature of work is going to change, because without all of this kind of, I'm going to use the term crap work in our life, we're going to be using higher level cognition at work, and potentially that'll be more fulfilling, but we've got to be prepared and trained for that. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm going to hand it over to Allison.
And then that kind of gets me to Allison.
Yeah.
If I want to be petting my chihuahua and eating my blueberry, not the other way around. Right?
Yes.
And so the reason I say that is because that only underlines my comment. Like, is it really decisions for people? Because it seems like it's with us, right? And Netflix is a great example of machine learning. Is Netflix next show? It's not watching the show, even starting it. It's just suggesting, right? And so that makes it seem like a cobot kind of world as opposed to for people.
Let me give you two examples, Nejeed, of where it is making decisions for organizations right now. One is when smart tech is screening resumes. Yes, you see who gets in through the gatekeeping, but you don't see who was left out. And that's a potential huge loss for organizations if they haven't dug into what are the assumptions built into the algorithms, how is it, mitigating for bias, racial and gender bias, right? So that's one area. The other area is increasingly social service agencies using smart tech to screen people for services like food and housing. And again, it's not clear who's getting left out. And that's our opening story in the book, is a screening that social service agencies were using to identify people who are at high risk for homelessness, called VI SPDAT. And when the tool initially was pen and paper, the social workers could see how it was working. Then it was automated and became part of these CRM packages. And what happens then, Nejeed, and it speaks to the first part of your question, is people were leaning back and just saying, well, it's on the computer. It's got to be unbiased. It's got to be, a genius level. And it wasn't. It was still the same crappy paper assessment that it had been originally. And for over 10 years, people were using this assessment and leaving Black and brown people out of these emergency services because the tool was fundamentally biased, racially biased. So the technology isn't smarter than humans. It isn't making necessarily key decisions like in your case, and the hope is that it will be integrated and people will always be in charge, but it is quickly becoming embedded in processes within organizations that aren't visible to people, and that's the concern.
And, maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves, but the board member in me sneaks in and says, then what we got to be thinking about is how do we put processes in place? How do we build our frameworks of work? How do we build the jobs that we're doing? And how do we empower the people in organizations to be empowered by these kinds of things? And that takes great leadership.
Well, so let me remind you, our definition of a smart nonprofit was human-centered, prepared, and knowledgeable, right? Before you do the processes,
being a big part of it.
Before you jump into, using the stuff, you got to back up and really deeply understand, not the code, we're not coders, right? But understand what happens
Certainly not.
When machines are taking over these processes. And that's why we say that this is a leadership challenge. It's not a technical challenge.
My next question kind of builds from that. And I think it's interesting because in the book, you talk about this concept of the dividend of time. As a father and a husband and a CEO and a board member, I'd like all those dividends, please, because I need them. But, talk about that and some of the other benefits rather that you think that smart technology can kind of usher us into as future and current users of it.
Sure, I'll take a stab at that. I'm going to back up just a little bit and reflect a little bit on, the pandemic as a disruptive workplace technology, if you will. It's really is thrown all the pieces up in the air and we keep on shifting. March 2020, we suddenly had to pivot to remote distributed teams and figure out like digital transformation of our program delivery. And, and probably Nejeed, we saw nonprofits sort of advance on that journey in a decade in like a year. And that was stressful, right? And then it kind of settled down, and 1 year, 2 years into the pandemic, it became kind of normalized. We're, able to do it. Maybe not doing it as strategically or effectively as we should, but learning as we go. And now then it was like a little bit of whiplash. We're going back to the office. No, we're not. We're going back to the office. Oh, we're going back in hybrid. And that's like another shift, right? And everybody has felt like when everybody is remote, we have so much screen time, and it's been difficult, right? And so there's been an increase of that quote crap work, because maybe not all of the organizations had systems that allowed them to access information. And the crap work specifically I'm talking about, and I'm sure your audience may be able to relate to this, just like, I'll say one word, shared hard drive, where you have to find some unstructured information. Where is it? And or you're cutting and pasting it out of your email, or it's in a jungle of Google Docs, right? And all that it takes cognitive load and bandwidth, and you have to like spend all this time just to organize yourself to get the work done, right? And that's exhausting. And or else there's this cut and paste from one system to another. And if I describe any more, I'm going to exhaust myself. But we have all of that, right? And so I think smart tech can really, chip at that, can really hack and kill off some of that grunt work. It's not a magic fairy dust. It's not going to happen with a snap of the finger. It does take work. But once we remove that, right, we freed up time. And what can we do with that time? How do we reinvest that time? So Can we reinvest it for work-life balance? You said I'm a dad, right? Can we go to a 4-day work week? Can we actually read our kids a bedtime story instead of like worrying about the emails that we have to answer, and multitask? And if we can do that, right, then we can replenish our energy and re-energize, and we can come back to this work, and we're actually focused. The actual work that we're doing is what we came into the sector to do. It's more fulfilling. It's mission driven. And if we look at it, maybe for fundraising, I'm sure the cut and paste festival, I used to call it spreadsheet aerobics, cutting and pasting from, one spreadsheet to another, or in this case, maybe it's in your CRM, but then you have a wealth management resource. You have to cut and paste from that and summarize it in a document on your shared hard drive or whatever. But that takes a lot of bandwidth and a lot of time that's being stolen from engaging with donors. And so if we can recapture that time and repurpose it to call the donors, become highly relational, then I think ultimately we're going to do better in our fundraising.
And that's a nice segue to my next question. And I think I'm going to send this one to you, Allison. And it's like, in the book, you share a lot of great use case examples. And Beth kind of just give us one, but maybe you can share a few of your favorite, or tell me about some of those.
So one, during the pandemic, were food banks in the Boston area beginning to use robots to shelve the, canned and other, food goods that they had. And what we loved most about that was, one, the pivot to what they needed during the pandemic when the volunteers couldn't do that. But two, the possibility now that once you have that in place, you could then identify other things for those volunteers to do, like calling families and just seeing how they're doing, Nejeed, or thanking people, thanking donors, right? To just do those really human connections. So that's one. The other is an organization that is in the opening chapter called Talking Points, created by Hee-Jae Lim in the Bay Area. And what we call exquisite pain point Hee-Jae was solving for is the difficulty that teachers have communicating with parents for whom English is not their first language. And starting in 2015, she had a very human-centered design process, very iterative, kept it very small initially, to create a translation app between parents and teachers. And it has grown tremendously. In fact, they just got a grant from Mackenzie Scott to the point where they are now facilitating 20 million conversations a year. And this issue of communications between parents and teachers isn't a small deal. It is one of the leading indicators of success for kids in school.
Beth, any to add to that, maybe your favorites?
Sure. I think I'll take a fundraising example that has to do with chatbots. And whenever I say I'm going to give an example of chatbots, I get this knee-jerk reaction. Chatbots, they're so horribly designed. They're awful. They're frustrating. And that's the point with them. You have to have a really well-designed chatbot, and that requires a lot of iteration and testing and thinking through, what information people really need and how to get that information to them in the quickest way, as opposed to let's just throw up a messenger bot on our site, because that's not a good idea. But the example comes from the Children's Hospital Miracle Network. And they do an online fundraiser that is a gaming fundraiser. I don't know if you're familiar with it. They do have some hospitals that are in Canada. And so they use, they've conceptualized their chatbots on their site as kind of donor information concierges, all right? And so they did an analysis of the frequent types of questions that we're constantly getting, when they did this event. And the questions might come in at 3 in the morning. You know, you never know with time zones and such. Like, for example, somebody from Canada wanting to make a donation, but asking what's the, you know, oh, it's in US dollars. How much does that translate to in Canadian dollars? And if there wasn't a staff person staying up at 3 o'clock in the morning to answer that question, then they would get it the next morning. And by then the donor might have lost their motivation to donate. So the chatbot is there and is always ready to answer these types of questions, but in a very streamlined way. So when they get that question, how much does it translate to in Canadian dollars, the chatbot can serve it up and say, it's this amount, and would you like to donate? Here's the landing site. And so this has helped in 2 ways. The staff get to get a good night's sleep, right, which makes them better at work, and they don't lose the kind of impulse of generosity when it strikes in the middle of the night for a donor, and it's providing great service to the donor. So I love this example. I could talk about it forever.
I've actually read about that example in other outside of your book. It's really well. It's a really cool the work they do on that I don't know, it's almost a peer-to-peer campaign. It's really powerful. Allison, this one's for you. Beth just gave us a great use case. It's beautiful. It worked, but that's not really how life works. As I'm learning with a 2-year-old, what things go wrong? Do you have some examples from the book or from your research that you can use as maybe a bit of a cautionary tale? I'm careful with that language because, you know, tech always goes wrong to our earlier conversation, but, you know, give us an example of the less pretty side of this.
So there are 2 different phases I want to talk about, Nejeed. One is the shiny object syndrome, right? Which is the folks down the street have a chatbot, so we need a chatbot. Somebody go get us a chatbot. You start with the tech, which is always a bad idea, right? The tech has to support specific pain points in your organization, and it is what we call hot sauce, not ketchup. You have to use it sparingly. So you need to begin with a human-centered design process around a particular pain point, and then work your way to the tech, which is also really important for people who are tech phobic, right? They are experiencing the pains in your organization. Maybe it's the constant interruptions from the same questions over and over again, or the overwhelming number of resumes that come in, or a workflow problem, right? They're experiencing these problems. But if you went to them and said, do you want a chatbot for a tech phobic person? The answer is, of course I don't, right? I'm not a robot. I don't want to work with robots. If you say to them, would you like to stop answering the same question all day long that interrupts your work? The answer is going to be, of course. So the need to stay human-centered is, you know, really, really important. The second part is what we alluded to a little while ago in talking about the screening tech. And that is that bias is being baked into these commercial tools, both because programmers bring their own assumptions to it, and it is actually made by human beings at some point, the code, and because we need these enormous data sets, the only place to get them is from the historic record. So maybe if it's in mortgages, for instance, or loans of any kind, if you grab that historic data, it is automatically biased against Black and brown people, right? That's what mortgages and financial systems were created to do, to keep Black and brown people out. So you have the data that's biased, the code that's biased, creating commercial products that are by definition biased. And so again, you have to know what questions to ask, and you have to work with vendors who are, like you, values aligned, right? We want to work with vendors that want to answer questions about how their systems were created, what assumptions were made, how it was tested, how you can test it for bias, who want to be partners in making sure that it's used well.
And Allison, keeping with this theme of ethics for a second, let's talk about some of the challenges that orgs face or could face with their data and using smart tech more ethically.
So we are swimming in a sea of data. We have been for years, but smart tech is going to expand that exponentially. And we think it's incumbent on nonprofits, Nejeed, to be even to raise the bar in terms of the ethical use of data and the privacy of data for their users. So for instance, the European Union has a set of laws around data privacy, GDPR, and one of those laws is the right to be forgotten, right? You have a right to get out of systems. What we have as standard practice here, started in the commercial sector, is the right to unsubscribe from newsletters. That's not a right to be forgotten, right? So we want nonprofits to understand we need to flip the power differential here. We need to put users in charge of their own data. We need to ask them, here's our plans for using your data. Is that okay with you? And frankly, if the fear of asking that question is that the answer might be no, then you shouldn't be doing it, right? So we want the nonprofits to be models for using people's data carefully, transparently, and ethically.
California has some pretty good data
Yes,
privacy laws too. In fact,
Yes.
not quite as, look, I'm a lawyer. I actually got to dig into both of these pieces of legislation. The California one's pretty good though, I have to say.
Oh.
It's well written. And I think, Beth, you're in California, right?
Yes. Thank
So,
God.
At least someone on this call is protected. Let's move a little bit towards the operational and kind of practical side of this conversation. How the heck can we as organizations, and I speak not wearing my kit hat, but rather as my board member hat, how can we prepare to use smart tech well? What do we need to be doing? What are the kind of training wheels that we need to put on the bike to move towards kind of really, truly, and effectively adopting smart technology?
Sure. So I'll take a stab at that, and I'll say jokingly, of course, we'll buy our book. That's why we wrote the book.
Not so jokingly, folks. I've known Beth a long
or
time.
maybe you'll win a copy of the book. And we have a whole chapter. Actually, it was one of the chapters I enjoyed writing the most. And it's called Ready, Set, Go. And, with social media, back 10, 11, 12 years ago, we were telling, jump in, fail fast, just get your feet wet, go do it, break things, move fast. And now I think we have to go slow to go fast. So we want people to hit the pause button and to back up. And I know this is so counter to the way a lot of nonprofits work, especially those of us who are activists, because we want go, 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 fast, big, right away results, or, we're impatient. But we have to have patience with this technology if we really want to reap the benefits. So the readiness piece starts with, and we've alluded to this already in the conversation, is finding that exquisite pain point that you want to solve. I mean, Allison gave that great example with chatbots just a moment ago. And that takes, some conversation with staff, but not just sitting in your conference room or on your Zoom call talking about what you think the problem is. You need to test your assumptions with end users, whether there's other staff, donors, stakeholders, users of your programs. So all of those really great design thinking techniques. So that's one piece of it. The next piece of it is that you need a donor journey or a user journey that really not only lays out the different stages and the workflow, but like, what should the machines do? What should be automated and what shouldn't be automated? Not everything in everybody's job should be automated, right? There are inherently human tasks that should remain human tasks, like problem solving, creativity, empathy, and so forth. And you always need to build in parts where there is human oversight and input. I'm thinking of a tool that I've been using for social media, to generate social media posts, that uses an AI algorithm. And if I just sent out all the posts that it initially wrote for me, they'd be a bunch of crap. Gosh, I'd be embarrassed. I have to go in and edit and figure out okay, this is okay, this isn't. But it saved me a huge amount of time writing the first draft. So you have to kind of go through your workflows and figure that out. And again, then coming to a proof of concept, because when we start to describe these two steps, people get overwhelmed. Oh my God, do we have to do this for everything? No, pick a proof of concept, one small problem, For example, Talking Points that Allison just described, that's an app, but it started as a manual spreadsheet to prove the concept. Can we translate in real time between teachers and immigrant parents effectively? And what are some of the challenges and what do we need to, adjust? So you need to have that sort of proof of concept, and then you need to build in piloting and testing. And then you need to think about all the things that Allison just described around choosing your vendors, value aligned vendors, all the data stuff you need to do. And then comes sort of a slow implementation to begin to scale and always be learning. And I think with this technology, it's not a pot roast where you set it and forget it. You need to have oversight, and that's where you need to maybe bring in advisors, especially ethical advisors. And I know that might sound really overwhelming for small nonprofits. So this is also an opportunity where nonprofits who are working on a particular issue, maybe to share an advisory group. So that's kind of, probably more than you asked for on how to get ready, but that in my mind, those are the steps.
And kind of digging on that, I think picking an aligned vendor, I think that's the term both of you have mentioned a couple times. Let's talk about selecting a tech partner. Mm-hmm. What are some of the things, or maybe even the single most important things that folks need to consider, maybe apart from values alignment, when selecting a vendor or vendors? Because I assume it's not going to just be one as we get into this AI revolution more, but yeah, what are some of the factors to consider when thinking about a vendor?
Want me to jump in, or Allison?
Yeah, I'll start.
I was looking at Allison, not that you can tell on my screen, but I was, yeah.
I'll start, and Beth, you really should jump in because you're really the expert on this. The first thing is, Nejeed, is that you want to work with a vendor who helps you get ready to use the tech well, right? No sense in buying a Tesla when your data is at the Volkswagen level, right? So you don't want somebody who's just selling you something because it's shiny. And you want somebody who is helping train staff to use it well. And you want a system that fits who you are and where you are right now. And that's not necessarily about the size of the vendor. Like Salesforce may have a product that works great for you. Maybe Philanthropy Cloud is, a terrific product. It works for a philanthropy called Deluxe. It's a company there for their internal philanthropy. They're not huge. But I think you want to work with a vendor who really understands your pain point, knows exactly where you are, and that fits what their product does. And is willing to provide training and help for staff. Go ahead and make that better, Beth.
Well, just to add just one quick thing, just Allison, you said, and I'm going to pull from Beth here, but Beth, you mentioned that it's not a static process, that the training and the learning and the knowledge is sort of forever. Maybe you can expand on how folks can actually do that apart from buy your book.
Sure, but I'm going to first go back and build on what Allison laid out, and just some quick points about choosing the right vendor. I'll say, technology has changed, but due diligence hasn't, right? I've been in the nonprofit tech field for the last 30 years, and due diligence has really been an important concept. And by due diligence, we are asking the vendor questions. And Allison's already laid this out, the types of questions you need to ask in terms of smart tech, questions about data, questions about algorithms. You need to do some comparison, to find the right tool for the job, and then and the right chemistry of the vendor that you want to work with. And then Google is your friend here, and I'll give you a little example. There's a whole set of smart tech tools that can automate the task of reviewing your website to make sure that it's accessible to people with disabilities. And I had a colleague say, "Hey, what do you think of blah 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 product? I'm going to use this for my website." And I sort of said, "Well, have you compared it to others? And have you ask the vendor questions, etc. Or have you Googled the word like ableist and the name of the software product, and lo and behold, they did, and they found that there were a couple of lawsuits pending. So due diligence is really important. Now, to get to your question about like learning as you implement the technology, there is a term called the challenge of transfer. Okay, so you know this, Nejeed. You don't just get the technology and it's magic fairy dust, and all of a sudden you gain all the benefits of all this time and you raise all this extra money. It does take some work. Spoiler alert, sorry for that, but there is a bit of work. And especially at the learning how to master it and how to routinize it, the use of it in your organization. When you first start introducing a new tool, there's cognitive overload because you have to kind of think about how the tool works and remember what the steps are until it becomes habitual. And so you go slow to then going fast. So there's that piece of it. And what happens is that people evaluate the results too soon in and say, oh, this isn't working. So they ditch it, but you have to give it time. The next thing is, I think it's also a really great opportunity and this is a cultural shift and it's a leadership problem too, is that there is an element of this of becoming a learning organization. About how trading stories of how you're applying this tech and cross-pollinating. I just interviewed some folks. It's a large organization, the National Aquarium in Baltimore, and their team has introduced a couple of new tools, but they do lunches once a week to share their insights about what they're learning. So they're becoming more empowered and more knowledgeable in using the tools. So those are just a few ideas.
I want to switch. I know we got a bunch of fundraisers on the call, so I do want to ask at least one, maybe two questions about fundraising specific topics. Let's talk donor retention because it's one of my favorite things in the world. Let's talk about, there's a data point in the book that I really like and cite all the time. And that's it costs 7 times more to acquire a new donor than to renew or retain or engage an existing one. How does smart tech fit? I mean, apart from Kit, which does do this, and I have to say that, how does smart tech fit into working towards a better donor retention rate?
So donor retention rates is one of my favorite topics, and it begins with what we call the leaky bucket problem. You get 10 donors into the bucket, and by year 2, there are only 2 left, right? And by year 5, you're lucky if 1 is left. So the response to all these donors leaking out of the bucket is to frantically keep filling it up. And that's how we got to this transactional mode of fundraising, right? Where the daily crappy emails come out of chip in or the sky is falling and nobody cares. And you're looking for 3% response, which means you either pissed off or, been put into spam by 97% of the people. I don't know how and when this system was created, but it is dreadful. And like you, I've been on a lot of boards. I've never heard a board discuss the retention rate and leaky bucket problem. They just keep frantically trying to fill it up. So what smart tech can do.
The exception of the N10 board, I have to say, we talk about that all the time. So I feel very proud about that.
I'll give you guys that.
Sorry, Beth, I know how much you miss it.
Yeah. So what smart tech can do. So when we first started to talk to the C-suite folks about using smart tech for fundraising, which was part of a contract we had with the Gates Foundation a few years ago, we could see people in the C-suite going through their budgetary calculations of, ooh, if that tech can do the donor prospecting that's been taking up 20, 30 hours a week, we can cut the staff from 8 to 4, right? And that presumes that things were going well with the 8, that you didn't have this leaky bucket, right? We want organizations to improve that donor retention rate. If you just improved it from 24% in, from year 1 to year 2 to 35%, right? With that initial 7 times the cost to get a new donor that you initially mentioned, that would be an enormous cost saving for the organization. So our biggest hope for smart tech with fundraising is that it frees up that fundraising staff to pivot to relationship building to keep those donors in the bucket, right? To thank them better, to find out why they're donors. Nobody ever asks, what does this cause mean to you? Why is it that you gave us that 20 bucks? Even if it's just because your brother asked you to, it still has some meaning to you that we could know. And then smart tech could help to customize the communications with you.
You don't have to sell me. I literally run a business on this. Like this is
I
whole
am
life.
the world on this because it is just ridiculous. Can you imagine a for-profit company like anybody who lives on repeat business, not the one-offs, but the repeat business folks being okay with a 24% retention rate in the first year?
Allison, I've been preaching this for 10 years. So like, I completely agree.
Yep.
One thing that's really tough for a lot of young, actually, or less young organizations is measurement. And Beth, I want to ask you a little bit about that. How, because if there's an adage that we have at the office, if you can't measure it, you can't make it better, right? And so how do you propose we use things like smart tech to measure fundraising behavior, efficacy, engagement, whichever way you want to take it?
Sure. And I'm sure you have some thoughts on this as well. Lots of thoughts. So I would put it in two different buckets. One would be implicit behavior and explicit behavior. So the explicit behavior is information that the donor gives you. Maybe their address, maybe their phone number. You're recording their donation. Demographics potentially, and so there's all this. And I'll give an example. Let's say you run a local animal shelter and you know that volunteering at the shelter may lead to some donations. So you might be asking them, what hours would you like to volunteer at the shelter? Or what kind of animals would you like to, work with? Or what kinds of tasks would you like to walk the dogs? What days of the week? Those are all explicit behavioral measurements that you can collect. Implicit is what they actually do. And how they feel about it and what the experience was like. So let's just carry this analogy a little bit further. You have someone sign up to volunteer. They give you all this explicit information about like walking the dog, the dogs, on Wednesdays at noon. They sign up for it. Your smart tech then sends them a survey to gather some implicit data, which is how was your experience? Was it great? On a scale of 1 to 5, let's say it's a 1. So the next communication that's generated might not be an ask for a donation, but it might be, a trigger that goes to the fundraising team to reach out to that donor to find out how the experience could be improved. And then you're gathering this information that's being, captured back into the CRM, and you have an algorithm that is then doing some predictive work on which of these volunteers are most likely to then give a donation, and perhaps maybe some messaging. There's other examples around that. So it's really about like a combination of this implicit and explicit information that's being fed into your system, and with an algorithm that's based on that's based on kind of the science of fundraising and or of social science behavioral. Behavioral donor behavior, right? Predictive donor behavior. So it's based on scientific studies based on that.
Which is literally what we do.
Literally what you do.
So you can sign me up to, can I be one of your?
I was just going to say, Beth, if you need another job before you write your next book, you know who to call. Look, folks, we're running on time. But there was a great question from the audience, and I've got one more, but I did want to get in. So firstly, I encourage folks to jump into the Q&A box on your Zoom and ask a question. One person did ask a great question, and I have many thoughts on this, but I will refrain from answering. And the question is to Allison and to Beth: do you believe in finding a single vendor with a suite of products, or kind of a number of best-in-class vendors, like one for events, one for CRM, one for donation management, and then building them connected or interconnected? And I think there's a lot of politics in this question, so I'm going to stay out of it, but happy to hear from the both of you.
I'm going to let you begin, Beth.
Yeah, I mean, this is a question it's been around before smart tech. Do we put to, do we buy the statue already put together, or do we buy a bunch of Legos and connect them? And there are different approaches, and I think it depends on the context of the organization, frankly, and how well they've thought through how to connect all the different pieces, what kind of expertise they have on staff to support that. And with kind of suites, we also have to think about what's in the suite, what capability is in the suite and what's not in the suite, and what do we really need and what don't we need? And if we do buy a suite, is it just making more work for us? I don't think I could give a blanket, do it this way or do it that way, because it really depends on context. And it goes back to that readiness step and figuring about like, what problem are you going to solve and what are the workflows, et cetera. So it is something to think about in your product selection.
I think the key issue here is that your IT people are not in charge of your technology. And I know that sounds counterintuitive, right? But we've been, more and more IT folks are the coaches for people in the use of technology. So it really has to begin with staff and with other stakeholders of what exactly do they need. And then the technology has to follow that. And everybody gets in trouble when the IT group, drops a platform on top of everybody and says, today we're switching to X, and that never goes well.
And I would add one factor, staying completely unbiased on this, and that's budget. I think budget can be very determinative. Whether we like it or not, we have budgets, we're constrained by them. And so that can play into this.
Right. And you see a lot of I think you see, not to generalize, but I will generalize. You see a lot of smaller organizations. There's a lot of product, low cost types of apps that we have out there, and that you can piece together different systems. But at a certain point, it works well, but and then it can,
absolutely. Absolutely. Last question before my question. I do have one more because it's a hopes and kind of big fun question at the end. But one of the attendees has asked, do nonprofits using this tech leverage it for both programming and fundraising, mainly programming, mainly fundraising? How are you folks seeing the early adoption and its splay between those two kind of hearts of the organization?
So we call smart tech an equal opportunity disruptor. It is coming into every single area of organizational life: admin, back office, finance, development, comms, fundraising. Every area in the next 5 years is going to have multiple applications for the use of smart tech. And so, you may begin to experiment with it in comms or fundraising, but it is going to have applications across the organization, which again is why it is so critically important that the C-suite understand what it is and when and how to use it.
Okay, I got a fun one or a one sentence one. So pith is key here, folks. Before we end today, I'm going to ask you both a question. If we get it right, if we can hit a grand slam or get the center of the dartboard or pick bad sports analogy here, what's your greatest hope about how smart tech can transform and help our sector?
You want to go first or second, Beth?
I'll go first. I'll try to be, I've been up since very early. I did a town hall this morning really early, so I'll try to be brief. Let's see. I always think of the Hemingway 6-word story, but I think, and I don't know if I can get it to 6 words, but more joy, that if we get this right, individual nonprofits can bring more joy to their work with better results and more energy. And if many nonprofits can do this, we can transform the sector and head into an amazing renaissance of nonprofit work, where we are upholding social change. We are making sure that we are standing for social justice, that we're making a better life for everybody, and we're preventing evil predator millionaires from taking our lives over. How's that?
And it wasn't 6 words, but it was one.
There you go.
Allison?
If smart tech is integrated into communities well, every single person who wants and needs help gets the help they deserve.
That was beautiful. Thank you. So thank you to both of you. Thanks for joining us to discuss your incredible book, your incredible research, and how it can transform our work as fundraisers and nonprofit leaders, and those of us that are lucky and privileged enough to work in the space. And thank you to all the listeners today for taking the time out of your schedules to be here. We hope that you're coming away with a little inspiration, a tiny bit better of an understanding about how AI and smart tech can transform your work every day. We'll be reaching out to the winners of Beth and Allison's books and the winner of our kit subscription later. So please do keep an eye on your inbox. And of course, I'd be remiss if anyone's interested in learning how smart tech can help your fundraising, someone on my team's popped a link into the chat about how you can learn about KIT and the work we do today. Allison, Beth, as always, it was a privilege and a pleasure being here. And I look forward to our next fireside chat, maybe beside a fire and maybe in person.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yes,
thanks,
thank
folks.
you.
Have a fantastic day. Thanks, Beth. Thanks, Allison. Ciao.